Good afternoon. Just as a level set, can everyone hear me? This is fine? Nodding in the audience. So, thanks for coming along. So my name is Leo Hanna. I'm the General Manager for Saba in EMEA. With me, my colleague James O'Gorman, who's one of our principal solution consultants, also based out of our London offices. So over the next few minutes, we want to talk about learning, social learning, and what we're saying is informed by what we hear from our customers. So Saba has about 2,200 customers across the world. These are predominantly very large enterprises, government institutions, but we also have some customers with 25 employees. And we speak to them regularly to find out what they see is going on in the market, how we should respond to it. And also we try to take a position of leadership ourselves in defining what the market might need. And so the title of this presentation is Social Learning and Getting Started in Social Learning. And I suppose this is something of a buzzword. So everyone will talk about social, and everyone will talk about mobile, and everyone will talk about big data. And social is an interesting one because we're at a certain part of the sort of adoption curve in social. We all understand it from our personal lives. And many employees in large organizations, in fact, the quote used to me yesterday, expect to go through a time portal back to the 1950s when they go and start using their enterprise technologies. Now, that's absolutely not what we want to be the case. So we're going to show you some of the interesting, exciting new technologies that leverage social during this demonstration. We also have a different demographic, changing demographic in the workplace. So I will hereby confess to being a mid-range Generation X person. I wish I was a Generation Y-er. They're so lucky. But anyway, they have different aspirations and different expectations of what they will get from the workplace. And so sharing for those people is the default. The social paradigm and way of working is the default. How they connect with each other and what they expect from the tools that they get and the technologies that they use in the workplace is very important. So social. Hold on. Let me just move forwards. Using the button here, right. So we're going to talk about gaining management buy-in. So the frequent experience of a learning user. So as learning professionals, we talk about learning a lot. If you're an employee, often the experience of a learning tool is to get an email prompting you to go to the learning tool to do your mandatory compliance training. You log in, you do it, you finish it, then you wait for the next email in a month's time or 2 months' time. And that really doesn't speak to anything about social. This is a top-down and hierarchical view of the world. Now, what we all want to move to is a world where people connect with each other, they share experiences, they share insight, they share knowledge. And that the organizational capability is enhanced. So where we talk about learning a lot, if you talk to boards of directors, they will talk about organizational capability and what is the best way of improving that. Well, one of the best ways is to maximize the connections, the informal connections that people can make to share their expertise. So we're going to talk about the hype and the reality and where we are and what we see from our customers. I suppose I'll put a question out there, which is, where are you on the social learning adoption curve? You know, if you look at your organizations or your role and what your role is in bringing that benefit to bear in your organization. Talk about some social learning use cases that we have seen work in the real world, and we'll also put up some demonstrations of how those use cases might look using cyber technology. And also next steps. So what to do is you go back into your office and go to talk to the influencers in your business, or if you're a decision maker, that's even better. You know, how to move forward and start deriving some of this benefit. Okay. Something's happening. Oh. Okay. So this is the social learning adoption curve as we see it. So the first step, so most enterprises will have a formal learning system, or in fact, many formal learning systems. All right, so these things will have evolved over time. If you're in a good situation, you have one learning platform. You can distribute relevant learning to all of your employees in a timely manner. They can complete it, so the regulatory piece is sorted. So the first step really is to enhance that formal learning, and we'll go through some use cases on that. The next is to identify specific processes. So which processes can we carve out from the rest of the things that the business is doing and say, well, this would really benefit from a social aspect in the learning. And we'll talk about one use case later on, which is ramp up and onboarding of new employees. So that's another thing that we've seen specific customers do and use technology to achieve pretty quickly. Next comes communities of practice. So this is probably more informal. This is where if you take a slice of expertise across the business, regardless of the organizational boundary or the geographical divisions, and let's say you have project managers across the business or senior leadership across the business, so they're going to have shared interests. They should be able to reach out to each other informally, connect informally, be facilitated by subject matter experts if necessary. And then the zenith, I suppose. And there are a few customers who are already at this point, who have a company-wide learning network that maximizes all of the social paradigms. So people are connecting informally, and that social learning tool or the learning platform has really become a social organizational capability enhancement platform. That's where the individual people are growing their skills. The organization's capability as a whole is being enhanced through that platform. So we move from regulatory compliance to organizational capability enhancement. Okay, I'll just talk briefly about a few of the cases that we've seen work. So I'll take Kaspersky Labs. So this is a very large security software vendor. Some of you may use them. It's about 3,000 people there. And they specifically used Saba and the social elements of Saba to help their customer service and support engineers work together to provide better service, better customer support to their customers. So they took a specific domain. They said, this is where we're going to deploy the social elements, and we need these people to be able to talk to each other, to quickly share information, to quickly get to the right answer and reduce ticket time, reduce ticket resolution time. Infosys, large SI, large outsourcer. So they use social element again. For them, this was a specific domain. They use social for change management. So if for one of their customers they were deploying, implementing a new ERP system, there are lots of communities that will be affected by that change, end users, administrators, IT stakeholders. And they created social areas to manage the change for those communities. The Adduce Group is a consulting organization based out of the US. There are less than 100 employees in that organization, and they use Saba as a social platform in its entirety across all elements and domains. So they're using it for learning, they're using it for performance management, they're using it for talent management, they're using it for communities of practice, informal peer-to-peer learning. Medtronic, one of the world's largest medical devices companies, they actually decided that the community that would best be served by social is their younger demographic. So the particular division was the diabetes division, had a very young demographic. So they decided to use social and the social elements of Saba to help that division. So when I talked about that adoption curve, you can see all of these different companies are using social or using the social elements for slightly different purposes. Okay, this doesn't work. The clicker doesn't work. Okay, so we're going to quickly jump to some demos now. And the first is going to speak to the enhancement of formal learning. So the first thing, social communities aligning to learning events, webinars, etc. So you can get the files and materials distributed easily. You can go back to them if you need to go back to them. So there's a repository there. People are talking to each other about that learning event. So let's just move on one. And the use case we're going to talk about here is leadership development. So obviously if you have pre-reading assignments, all of this can be distributed via the tool, but actually what we want to talk about is the social elements of this. So I think James is going to talk us through what a social learning system looks like and how it's used in this use case. So I'll hand over.
That's great. Thank you, Leo. Good afternoon. So to Leo's point, what I'd like to do is just share with you a couple of concepts that we see within the latest LMS, what we call LMS 3.0 within the industry. And one of the places I want to start is the catalogue, to look specifically at the differences we see now between formal and informal learning in terms of a social LMS. If you look traditionally at a traditional LMS, it had a catalogue, very structured, managed centrally, with a range of materials that were pushed out to the end audience for consumption. So very, very much a centrally managed catalogue that looked something like this. I'll just give that a second to come through. Okay. So this you should be familiar with, centrally pushed out courses. You can go ahead, register, have approval, etc. around that. However, within the social paradigm, and looking specifically at the formal and the informal within the latest LMSs, what we see now are a range of additional content components that are available to the end user to consume. So you'll notice on the middle of the screen, people become resources within the new LMS. So being able to reach out and find experts around your organization, network with those people, and have access to information that they're either inputting to the system or access to see what they have consumed for the system to become the expert that they are. In addition to that, we'll see files, links, discussions that are taking place, groups that are forming within the LMS to talk about specific areas of learning that individuals can access and participate within. So it's no longer a formal catalogue, but rather access to people, access to resources that are being putting in by the wider audience into the system, not just the central teams. So how does that happen? The system is no longer managed by the central admin team. The individual, and each individual in essence, can be a subject matter expert. Core and critical to the system is the concept of the employee profile. Okay. On the left-hand side, you'll see the latest employee profile. A traditional LMS profile would simply have given you access to the individual's learning and their completed learning record. Okay, that would have been quite a stagnant transactional system. However, nowadays in the social paradigm, along the right-hand side here, we can see a range of different attributes that are sitting against the employee. So we can see what the employee is bookmarking in the system. We can see what other sites they're linking to, they're sharing, they're bringing in and making available to other colleagues around the organization. So if I click, for example, on the file option, this employee has so far input 26 files into the application themselves. Okay. Those 26 files appear. And they can also be shared and made available to everybody else around the organization as they see fit. So what that now means is when an individual comes into the system to search for a piece of content, they're no longer just looking through that formal set of training courses, but having access to a range of different new parameters, things like documents, the courses, as I said, but in essence, they are accessing and can view groups, people, videos, files, a range of other materials, each of which is tagged and associated to a specific area of interest within the business. So it gives them a lot more content that is basically crowdsourced content brought in to sit alongside the formal content within the system. Another paradigm to look at when we get to the concept of the informal and the formal is starting to support individuals as they go through programs. So the example that I have here in the system is an executive development program. You'll see at the beginning it looks like it's a formal set of training content, but suddenly becomes much more of a collaborative type of environment that the end users can work within. Okay. 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 Apologies, network's a little slow. Okay, so what we're going to see initially is what we would call a traditional blend of training offerings. What a traditional LMS would provide, a series of courses that an individual needs to go through. So we have a list of an Apple iPhone course, virtual classroom courses that the individual needs to participate in. That would be the old paradigm. Whilst today they'll still do those courses, what they now have access to is what we call a group that's related specifically to that area of learning. So if I take you into that group, as the learner, they now have access and visibility to the other individuals who are participating in this particular piece of training. So straight away we get a group and a collaborative concept taking place. So within this group, all of the participants can enter in. They can start to share files within each other, so they can go out if they find other materials that are relevant to that particular piece, on your SharePoint sites or externally. They can bring those in and bring them into the context of the course for the benefit of all the other people that are actually taking that course as well. They could start discussions and have communications between each other. And in essence, what we're looking to try and do is to try and move towards the 70-20-10 paradigm. You're not just taking the content and getting out of the system, but you're staying in the system more regularly to access other content that's been crowdsourced by others who have actually participated in the same piece of learning. So those resources are available ongoing. As I said, discussions, etc., are also available to people to jump back in, and also have instructors in here to support those groups ongoing. We also support the ability for the end user to subscribe to a digest. So they may be in here quite frequently at the beginning of a cycle, but as they've participated in the training and moved back to the business, the weekly digest will send them updates about any new materials that have been put in by subsequent employees who've taken that course, to keep them up to speed and keep them educated as new materials appear within the system.
Okay, so that is my experience of executive training. So again, I would just want to juxtapose, the old experience to the new experience. The old experience was to receive an email, to go to the mandatory training system, do the regulatory compliance. Our vision is that people will start to live in this system. So there are some systems that most people fire up when they get into the office. They never get fired down. So their email system, for example. We think the social learning system, the social performance management and talent management system should be like that as well. So as an individual, I am following certain people. I have attached myself to mentors. I can tag and rate documents and discussions. So the whole way of thinking about sharing my expertise and other people sharing their expertise is facilitated by the technology. But as I said, we're going to talk about use cases. We talked about enhancing formal learning, but we just need to move the slide on. The next thing is accelerating processes. So it's the same piece. So enhancing formal learning, if you remember, was at the bottom left of the adoption curve. Next stage on accelerating specific processes. So I spoke earlier about one good one to look at is ramp up and onboarding. So we're going to take a quick look at ramp up and onboarding and how that can be facilitated by the tool.
Okay. So we've talked to you a little bit about groups and collaboration between individuals. So from an onboarding perspective, the exact same environment would suffice. Having new employees coming in and accessing information and participating in a collaborative fashion within that group. But in terms of extending the capabilities around onboarding, what we can look to do is to start to leverage the power of the network, the power of people in the organization as resources. So we can provide each new hire with a people view of the organization. The system is intelligent. Would be. Bear with me. The system is intelligent, just as this reloads, to start to make recommendations to me about which individuals around the business I should network with and I should be in contact with. So it will look to my job role, it will look around the organization and find other people with similar job roles and say, perhaps you want to network and connect to these people. And if you remember the profile that I showed you earlier, each person's profile contains a range of information, the files they're putting in, the discussions they're taking part in. So as I networked out into the wider audience, I get access to those resources that are put in from the employees. So here are a range of suggested people based perhaps on my job role. I can click through and look at their profile. We'll do that in a moment. Or above that, I'm able to go off and look for individuals around the business that are tagged as experts in specific parts of the organization. So if I work in customer service, for example, I can click through and find a range of individuals working in that part of the organization and basically decide I want to look at those people's profile and find if they're of value to me. So people typically learn from people. Being able to access and network to those individuals has a lot of power to any new employee into an organization. So once they start to find people and to network to those individuals, if I click on one of the individuals that I'm networked to, we then have a relationship. I have a relationship with this individual in the organization. So I can come in at any point in time, and if I found what they're providing in the system is of benefit to me, I could start to leave an impression and say, thank you for your information. That's been extremely useful. You're a really good team player. The information you put in is very innovative and of use to me. And we're capturing all of those impressions throughout the system on an ongoing basis. So as you move towards things like talent management and performance management, which we're not necessarily speaking about today, those informal impressions become available to talent managers and the wider business to understand who within the organization is contributing materials that are very, very useful to other people. But in this case, I'm just actually interested in looking at Jeff's profile. Okay, so I've just joined, been recommended to network to Jeff, and straight away in coming into the system, I see everything that Jeff has been doing within the application that is public. So I can see all of Jeff's bookmarks. Jeff works in the same part of the business as me. It's likely those bookmarks are useful documents for me to read or courses for me to participate in. I can have access to Jeff's files, information, other websites that they've linked out to that they've brought into the system, and all of that suddenly becomes value to me. I'm not having to hunt around the business to look for relevant materials. I'm going to the people that I know that are experts and leveraging what they've been doing in the system and their expertise to help me on a day-to-day basis do my job as I've just joined a new organization. Okay, so a completely different paradigm to a number of years ago where your onboarding experience was coming in, taking 5 or 6 courses and removing yourself from the application. You're much more engaged and it's much more sticky now in terms of getting you out and networking and getting value from the wider source that's out in the organization.
So one thing I should mention, under Jeff Tanner's photograph there, you notice the links out to social sites, but also PQ, which is People Quotient, which is quite a nice feature. That's sort of, it's an algorithm that tracks people's engagement in the system. So in Saba, we use this, we use the system. So the people who have very high people quotients are the people who are posting a lot of informative or useful content that's being rated highly by their peers. And we find, in product management, people who are sort of at the center of activity start to develop a high PQ. So that's another piece where sort of gamification and sort of newer technologies, newer ways of looking at systems and technologies is coming into play. So I think just to recap, this is where people could and should live, right? So this is one of the systems that stays open all day because they're instant messaging via the system. They're posting their own documents on the system. They're tagging other people's documents on the system. They're also accessing the formal content in the curricula. So the question is, we said at the start, how do you get management buy-in for this process? Very few people go for the sort of big bang straight to every piece of functionality across the entire enterprise or across the entire organization, although with the Educe example we have done that. So you have to look at the use cases. So the first one was enhanced formal learning. The second was to look at specific cases, specific processes. And the third is about communities of practice. So I mentioned if you have a specific group of engineers or project managers, or name the discipline that can exist anywhere around the world or anywhere around your organization, how do they connect with each other and share best practices and inform and educate and enhance the organizational capability of that discipline? So I think that's the next piece we're going to talk through.
So I think more importantly is how do we track these interactions around an organization going forward, moving away, as I said, from traditionally reporting on the number of people who've done the number of courses. Let's look at this from a completely different perspective in what we call the dynamic network analysis. So if I take a group or a community of practice, which we have here on the screen, these are a series of individuals within the organization that have networked to each other. Back to my earlier point about reaching out and networking and following individuals and consuming and providing information to each other. What we're looking at here is a visual representation of that within a specific group of individuals. You'll notice in the middle of the screen, we have an individual here called Ben Willis. Okay, Ben Willis is central to this network. You notice how wide the actual circle is there? Ben is contributing a lot of information into the system. That's why the size is so big. But more importantly, if we look at the number of individuals networking to that person, and the width of the lines is telling us the amount of traffic flowing between those. So these people have networked together. Ben is pivotal to this particular team. A lot of his information is highly valued. It's been consumed by a lot of people moving around the organization, moving around the network, which tells us a number of things. It tells us he's a very, very valuable individual within the organization. but it also lets us know that if Ben were to leave or we were to move Ben out to another part of the organization, that would leave a large gap within our network and a large knowledge gap at that as well. So there is a possibility that the actual group could collapse in on itself for the simple fact that this individual is pivotal for providing information to so many people. Okay? So we start to see people and information flows in a much different way. It's not that linear top-down approach that we had historically, but it's a much more interactive. We're identifying knowledge workers around the organization in a much better way, but also it allows us to helps us with things like talent performance management and understanding who within the business is critical to the overall success of teams and projects that are taking place as well.
Okay, so I think that's the end of the demonstration section, so we'll probably just wrap up and cover off the key messages. But the first thing is we have a new demographic of talent coming into organizations, and they expect the technology that they use in the workplace to be equivalent to the technology they use at home. Their default position is sharing information. They want to connect. They don't see geographic or divisional boundaries in the same way that Generation Xers or some Generation Xers might see them. And so that battle for talent suggests that we need to provide tools that help people learn, but also that helps the organization enhance capability. So enhancing the capability of the organization and moving away from learning perceived as a regulatory compliance function is very important for learning professionals. And I hope what we've shown in the demonstrations is that the social paradigm and social networking tools, as represented in this case by Saba's implementation of social, which by the way is pervasive across all of the functions, really helps people connect and really helps people share. So to sell at board level this concept, it's about organizational capability raising. So we build on what we had, which was formal learning, and then we move through specific use cases for specific processes, through to communities of practice, and then at some point, hopefully, you'd see an entire organization utilizing all of this functionality. So an individual comes in, fires up their learning system or their talent system, whatever they wish to call it, and they live in that system because that is how they connect their insight and their information to their peers. That's it from us. Thanks very much for attending. We'll hang around here for any questions if people want to come up and see us. Thank you very much.